다 다자 먼저 좀 첩식으로 다는데 야자 야다 뭐 망조 가는 로 가야지. 단 점이 군세리 점이 참을로. 다 첨비 미지 네베 차로도 여도 유지리디 이내 강다 망조 타는 로 돼야지. 다 약수 차되기 하리. 자 드네 뭐 이러잖아요. 아주 배바이니 점이 찌도 첨비지 랑가 로 가야지. 샤케시 뭐리.
His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama began planning for a future democratic Tibet years before the Chinese invasion. By mid-1950s, he had established a number of committees to implement a series of land, tax and other political reforms. He found inspiration during his first visit to one of the world's youngest democracies, India.
아주 통불이. 그래서 당원은 전에 그 라와 담주 라와 지금 망조 시대한테 커져지 그게 가서 우리 개선해야 돼. 치세 낭세 채토야. 뒤에 나한테 모서지야 그렇죠.
But before the young Dalai Lama could bring his vision of a democratic Tibet to fruition, China's takeover of his country forced him to seek refuge in exile in March of 1959. The government of India generously opened its doors to him and the 80,000 Tibetans who spilled over the Himalayan passes fleeing persecution. His Holiness faced the daunting task of being responsible for the welfare of this huge refugee population and to find ways to provide them with education, housing and employment while working to preserve the profound and ancient Tibetan Buddhist culture that was being systematically destroyed in Tibet. However, his vision of a Tibetan democracy was never far from his mind. Less than a year after he left Tibet, the 25-year-old leader made his first public announcement of his plans to democratize the Tibetan government. In 1960, Tibet's first elected body, the Commission of Tibetan People's Deputies, took their oath of office on September 2nd, a date that every year is celebrated as Tibetan Democracy Day. On March 10, 1963, the 4th anniversary of the Tibetan People's Uprising, the fledgling Tibetan government finalized a charter that became Tibet's first constitution. The charter is based on the UN Declaration of Human Rights, guaranteeing equality before the law and freedom of expression, assembly and religion. But along with the modern norms of democracy, the exiled Tibetan government has incorporated its traditional values in an article that is unique among modern political constitutions, that Tibetan polity shall be based upon the principle of non-violence. His Holiness has always initiated and occasionally found the need to encourage the Tibetan community to take up democratic principles.
개인이 고도도 이나다 겨울무치기 다바 개로 조키야 디파 샤제 다 망조 디치고기 있어야기 섬주다 섬주 용야데 도시 몽구지가 로리야 뭐출을 소리 진 거도 내려 충분해 다디 파지 추주 리지리도 안에 아주 마음에 쩌림 신지시 sö제 디닝도지 파지 추주 리스물로 임베 마사라 제베리 디나라 겨울무시가 왕저디 아니 그게 계시인 그게 거바로 충분이나 아니 겨울무시 왕저디 규주 당고야 사지 계시 다 되는 거 쪼래 들리다 자 미만나로네 호트칼다 마콤에 소리지.
In the first 30 years of exile, the road to democracy was rather slow. All the ministers of the cabinet were still appointed by His Holiness, and there was little financial accountability to the parliament. The establishment of local assemblies helped to strengthen democracy at the grassroots level and allowed for the democratic participation of all Tibetans. In 1990, His Holiness expanded the number of parliamentary members. He gave them independent authority to appoint members of the cabinet and increase their powers of legislation, policy making, and financial control. He also sought to give women a greater voice in government. In 2001, His Holiness requested Parliament to revise the Charter and to provide for Tibet's first public election of the Chief Cabinet Minister, equivalent to a Prime Minister.
다 쉽게 말씀드리면 대화름치 추진이 구치전 독스 침벌이 콜콜에 대지들이 판도 전부 중요지리. 그래도 이내 따지 주주 열ene 주시리. 아니 나중에 내줄이야. 대화름치 시전이 지금 미지 다야 뱅게로 참업에도 뿡대로 소리 샤비는 뒤주 라는 момент 하네 있네. 되냐가 주리. 아니 그 지금 가족을 떠주고 사는 따외 사는 시합이 있네리다 간다 처진 상담이 있는 거 아주 별까지 미망 ramang tabzu jire mato ti mi gelbe nezu mari.
Tibetan exiles from the 55 settlements in India, Nepal and Bhutan, as well as those who had immigrated to countries as far-flung as Australia, America and Norway voted on their choice of candidates. It was a daunting task for the Election Commission to oversee free and fair elections of a people who are scattered over the four corners of the globe.
On
the 20th of August 2001, the Election Commissioner announced that Professor Zamdong Rinpoche would serve as Tibet's first elected Chief Cabinet Minister. Tibet had now taken its place alongside the true democracies of the modern world. The Tibetan government consists of three bodies: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. The Tibetan parliament is the legislative body representing Tibetans both inside and outside Tibet. The Kashak or cabinet consists of 8 ministers, including the directly elected chief cabinet minister, and is responsible for 7 administrative departments: religion and culture, home, finance, education, security, information and international relations, and health. The cabinet can introduce bills and motions and participate in deliberations but has no right to vote. Finally, the Supreme Justice Commission functions as an arbitration court within the parameters of Indian law, handling civil and administrative cases. The 3 independent bodies of election, audit and public service commissions ensure fair elections, physical accountability and procedural transparency. Parliament, known as the Assembly of the Tibetan People's Deputies, meets twice a year, in March and September, and it is responsible for the accountability of the administration on political matters and social welfare. Parliament members regularly visit the Tibetan settlements and bring public grievances and suggestions to the notice of the administration. The Parliament also ratifies policies and has the power to impeach the heads of the independent bodies, the Justice Commissioners and the Cabinet. Apart from the business inside the House, the Tibetan Parliament also advocates for the cause of Tibet around the world, visiting and receiving parliamentarians from various governments, and organizes conferences such as the World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet. When Parliament is not in session, the 11-member Standing Committee meets twice weekly to deliberate on day-to-day issues. The Public Accounts Committee, Budget Estimate Committee, and other special committees are constituted from time to time. The Secretariat, headed by the Secretary General and the staff, carry out all administrative functions, including documentation and dissemination of parliamentary procedure, under the guidance of the Speaker and Deputy Speaker. Members of Parliament are elected by a system that is designed to fit the unique situation of a government operating outside of the country it represents. MPs are not elected based on a regional population such as in a federal democracy, nor on party affiliations in a system of proportional representation, since the Tibetan government has no political parties. In the Tibetan government system, the three main Tibetan provinces are represented by the same number of members, irrespective of the size of the population of these provinces, in a system that is similar to the way that US senators are elected to the Senate. Every 5 years, general elections are held for the members of parliament and the prime minister in one day all over the world except inside Tibet. Lay Tibetans in India, Bhutan and Nepal collectively elect 10 members from each of the three traditional provinces in Tibet, Itzang, Kham and Amdo. In addition to voting on their provincial representatives, the Tibetan clergy elect 10 more members, 2 from each of the 5 religious traditions. Tibetans in North America elect 1 member. Tibetans in Europe elect 2. The Charter also provides for His Holiness the Dalai Lama to nominate up to 3 members from specialized fields. This brings the Tibetan Parliament to a maximum strength of 46 members. A fairly recent development is for the MPs to be given the responsibility of earmarked territories in exile so that they can look after the interests of those constituencies. Thus, a member of parliament who is elected by people from central Tibet, for example, can also look after the interests of Tibetans who are living in an area of South India, regardless of where they are from in Tibet. The government in exile always keeps its sights on Tibet. When the opportunity arises, the present government will dissolve and a new one formed with the participation of Tibetans both inside and outside Tibet. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has clearly stated that he will not hold a political role in any future Tibetan administration, but will offer his guidance when required.
In the
future, as stated in its charter, Tibet will be a demilitarized zone, its government and its people serving as an example of the possibility of peace and tolerance in the modern world. March of 1959. The government of India generously opened its doors to him and the 80,000 Tibetans who spilled over the Himalayan passes fleeing persecution. His Holiness faced the daunting task of being responsible for the welfare of this huge refugee population, and to find ways to provide them with education, housing and employment while working to preserve the profound and ancient Tibetan Buddhist culture. His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama began planning for a future democratic Tibet years before the Chinese invasion. By mid-1950s, he had established a number of committees to implement a series of land, tax and other political reforms. He found inspiration during his first visit to one of the world's youngest democracies, India, that was being systematically destroyed in Tibet. However, his vision of a Tibetan democracy was never far from his mind. Less than a year after he left Tibet, the 25-year-old leader made his first public announcement of his plans to democratize the Tibetan government. In 1960, Tibet's first elected body, the Commission of Tibetan People's Deputies,
대학 조선이야. 나 투미시게 말이지 이네 대학 조선 다와 친체 아주 통불이. 그래서 당원은 전에 그 라와 담주 라와 지금 망조 시대에 커져지 그게 가서 우리 개선해야 돼. 치세 낭세 채토야. 뒤에 나한테 무서지야 그렇죠.
But before the young Dalai Lama could bring his vision of a democratic Tibet to fruition, China's takeover of his country forced him to seek refuge in exile in